Hey everyone and welcome! Today, we're going to dive into one of the most fundamental subjects for any future doctor, biochemistry. Now, I know it might sound a little intimidating, but I promise, by the end of this, you'll see why it's really the essential language of all modern medicine.
So, let's just start with the biggest question right off the bat. Why on earth does someone who wants to heal people need to start by understanding molecules and chemical reactions? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Biochemistry isn't just some class you have to pass. It's the very foundation that all of modern medicine is built on. You know, think of it this way. If you wanted to fix a really complex machine, what's the first thing you'd need? You'd need the user manual, right? Well, biochemistry is exactly that. It's the detailed instruction manual for the most complex and incredible machine we know of, the human body.
At its core, that's all biochemistry is. It's about using the rules of chemistry to explain life itself. It gives us that solid foundation for clinical medicine by showing us how our bodies work at the most basic molecular level. And you absolutely have to understand that before you can even begin to figure out what's happening when things go wrong.
All right, so the first step in reading this user manual is learning to identify all the parts. In our bodies, that means getting to know the 4 major types of biological molecules. So let's meet the key players.
First up, we have proteins. These are the absolute workhorses of our cells. I mean, they do almost everything. They give us structure, like our muscles and skin, and they also act as enzymes, these tiny little machines that make all the essential chemical reactions in our body happen. You can think of them as both the bricks and the construction workers.
Next on the list are carbohydrates, which you probably know as sugars and starches. Their main job? Energy. They're the quick, easy-to-access fuel that powers everything we do, from thinking hard to lifting something heavy. And when the enzyme needed to break down a certain sugar is missing, that's when you get conditions like lactose intolerance.
Then you've got lipids, or what we commonly call fats. And they do a lot more than just store energy for the long haul. They're also essential for building the protective membranes around every single one of our cells, and they help keep us insulated. They're totally vital for just holding our cells together.
And last but not least, we have the information molecules, the nucleic acids. We're talking about DNA and RNA here. DNA is like the master blueprint, holding all the instructions for building and running the entire body. And RNA? Well, RNA acts as the messenger, carrying those instructions from the main office out to the cellular construction sites.
Okay, now if you remember one thing from this section, please make it this. Structure dictates function. It is the single most important rule. The specific, three-dimensional shape of a molecule is what determines the job it can do. For instance, just a tiny change in the shape of the hemoglobin protein is what causes sickle cell anemia. It's a core principle that explains why a perfectly folded protein works just right and a misfolded one can lead to devastating diseases.
Okay, so we've met the parts, and we get the golden rule. Their shape determines their job. But now, how does the body actually use all these parts to get things done? Well, the next huge piece of the puzzle is understanding how the body's engine runs. This is all about how we create and use energy, and it's called metabolism.
Metabolism is pretty much the sum of every single chemical reaction happening inside you this very second. It's this incredibly complex dance of taking the food you eat, the carbs, fats, and proteins, and turning it into 2 critical things: energy you can use, and the building blocks you need to grow and repair yourself. It's like the body's own bustling economy, always at work.
Now, the nitty-gritty details can get super complex, but we can simplify the whole thing down to a basic energy production line. First, fuel comes in from our food. Second, that fuel gets broken down in a series of reactions, like the famous TCA cycle. And third, in that final step, energy gets released in the form of a molecule called ATP. And ATP is the universal energy currency for all of our cells.
So, when you boil it all down, the study of metabolism is really about answering that one central question. Future doctors have to understand how the body produces and uses energy because managing that energy budget is absolutely key to diagnosing and treating a ton of diseases, from diabetes to all sorts of inherited metabolic disorders.
So we've covered the parts, and we've covered the power source. Now let's talk about the instruction manual itself. How does all that genetic information stored in our DNA actually get turned into the things that make our bodies work?
It all starts with DNA. Like we said, it's the master blueprint. Imagine it's locked away safely inside a vault in the center of each cell, the nucleus.
It's the permanent, super secure archive that holds the instructions for every single protein your body will ever need to make.
But, you wouldn't take the one and only master blueprint out to a messy construction site, right? Of course not. So instead, the cell makes a temporary, disposable copy of a specific instruction, a gene, and that working copy is called RNA. It's the messenger that takes the plan from the secure head office out to the factory floor of the cell.
And finally, the cell's machinery reads that RNA message and uses it to build the final product, a protein. That protein then goes off and does its very specific job. This fundamental flow of information, from DNA to RNA to protein, is so important it's actually known as the central dogma of molecular biology. It's a foundational truth for pretty much all of life.
So, after all that, here's the billion-dollar question. How does all this theory about molecules and cycles actually connect to treating real patients? Why does a doctor need to know this stuff? Well, this is where biochemistry truly becomes medicine.
When you get right down to it, so many diseases are, at their very core, biochemistry problems. A missing enzyme isn't just a chemical issue, it causes a metabolic disease. A signaling error that tells a cell to grow out of control isn't just a communication breakdown, it's cancer. A mutation, a typo, in the DNA blueprint isn't just a small mistake, it can lead to genetic disorders like cystic fibrosis. Understanding the root cause at this molecular level is the key to all modern diagnosis and treatment.
So to wrap this all up, what do you really learn in medical school biochemistry? It really boils down to 3 core lessons. First, you establish the foundation. You learn the parts. Second, you understand the operation. You figure out how the body's engine runs. And third, and this is the most important part, you connect all of that incredible science directly to the health of your patient.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating thought to end on. We've moved beyond just understanding these molecular processes. Now we're starting to actually manipulate them with technologies like gene editing. So as we get better and better at literally rewriting the body's user manual, the question isn't just about how we treat disease anymore, but how we might stop it from ever happening in the first place. What do you think is next?